What's going on, guys? The saga continues, and today I wanted to make just one more video. I know that I've been rapid firing these videos, but when you make them as low quality as I do, and with the amount of content that there is out there, you gotta know that I'm gonna rapid fire these out sometimes. So I was just perusing on X before I go to bed, like I normally do, and I saw this post here from everyone's favorite former CAG member and Commander content creator Lee Kwai. And he said, if you thought the fallout was over, think again. The RC has just handed the keys to WOTC. Now, I've already done a video about this, but I find it very interesting that he used these specific words. If you thought the fallout was over, think again. You see, I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, and if you haven't gone and watched the videos on this saga that I've been creating, I highly recommend you do that, simply because there's so much information, there's so much truth to be uncovered surrounding the September 2024 bans. The September 2024 Commander bans are you know what? I'm going to go out and say it. They are the most, the most seismic shift in the Magic the Gathering community perspective of Wizards of the Coast and the powers that be that I have ever seen. I mean, this has created such a ripple effect throughout the entire community that it just cannot be understated how long this is going to have after effects and how long this fallout is going to be around. There are going to be things that are going to be uncovered for months and months and maybe even years about what happened with these bans. The thing is that the amount of money that was affected, the amount of money that was made by WOTC, the statements that have been made, the things that are happening, the response from the community, everything, it's just been crazy. I mean, it rivals a global political event in the amount of tea that there is to be spilled with all of this that's going on. And, you might think that I'm over exaggerating a little bit there, but I mean, I don't think that I am. I mean, you're talking about an amount of money that was tampered with that is equal to some full economies for other countries. I mean, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars are in play here. When you add in the amount of money that WOTC made, when you add in the value of the TCG economy as a whole, and the percentage that Magic, I mean, it's $1 billion industry, and there's a lot of money at stake here. And I mean, I'm not even just talking about the bans. If you watch my previous video on the poll that I did, where the lack of trust that happened, I mean, this is ground shaking. Okay. Like, there are millions upon millions of people that play this, that have this game as a hobby, but not just as a hobby, as a career. I mean, there's so much more involved into Magic the Gathering than I think anybody really realizes. When you go to your LGS and you play Magic the Gathering, I'm almost certain that you don't sit there and think about just how big Magic the Gathering has become, how many lives it affects, how many people are employed by it, how many investment portfolios are partially made up with it, how many purchases are made on a daily basis. I mean, for crying out loud, the blockchain was okay, let me just explain something that I learned a long time ago, and this is my understanding of it. But the original concept of the blockchain that is, that is basically like Bitcoin, was conceptualized because of Magic the Gathering Online to track individual trade transactions. That's something that I heard. I don't know how true it is, but the idea that that information is out there and people have that opinion just tells you how widespread it is. Because if that is true, Magic the Gathering is much bigger than anybody could possibly imagine. I mean, like look at you've got Post Malone paying $2.6 million for a single card. I mean, that just doesn't happen. You've got people that have proposed to each other using Magic the Gathering games that were not just Richard Garfield. And a lot of players, they don't even understand the secondary market goes beyond just the cards themselves. There's memorabilia like paintings and things. I mean, guys, a recent painting for the alternate art version of a specific card that is played in Modern. What's the name of that thing? It's the artifact Arcbound Ravager. Thing sold, the original painting sold for over $50,000. Just a painting, the original painting for some of these cards. There's a whole classification of Magic the Gathering related memorabilia that isn't even considered when you're looking at like TCG player and stuff. And it's all based on the trust that this company is making the right decisions and on the longevity of the game and the overall trust that the community has in the game itself. This is important stuff, guys. Like, and if you don't believe me, I may not be explaining it as well as it even deserves to be explained, but it is a massive, multi-level industry that spans the globe. And it's no wonder that this backlash is happening in the way that it is. And when you have somebody like Josh Lee Kwai, who was part of the CAG, the Commander Advisory Group, and he leaves, and then he posts this and he says, if you thought the fallout was over, think again. I don't think that he's just referencing the fact that the Rules Committee handed the keys over to Wizards of the Coast. I think that there's a lot more coming. I think that there are things that we, as regular peons in all of this, don't really understand. There are plans still happening in the background. There are things that are going to come into play that we just can't even fathom right now. And the fallout from this is just the catalyst of this glass ceiling breaking above us. And we are just dodging pieces, shards of glass that are zipping down towards the community and dividing us and putting us into little sections of safety and comfort. But there's a lot that's going to go on. And I mean, you might be listening to what I'm saying, like, oh man, here it goes. The sky's falling. Magic's going to die. And that's the thing is I personally think that it might be, and I hate to use this financial term because it's kind of like a political term, but it might be too big to fail at this point. But from a very real standpoint of if we let this fail, like, put it like this. If enough money and value is lost in Magic the Gathering, I believe personally it would affect the stock market. Like, I know you guys are like, that's nonsense. What a stupid take. But if you really think about this critically, think about how many transactions. I used to be a game store owner, all right? And I would watch people paycheck to paycheck come in, buy cards, do all this stuff, sell cards. Like, it is a functioning, moving player in the market of the city that I lived in. I mean, there are a huge number of people that around specific holidays, around specific times of the month, they head over to their local card shop to sell some cards. And the value that they generate from that sometimes pays their rent, pays some bills, pay their phone bill. Imagine if all of that crashed and you multiply that over enough people. it has got to have some repercussions that we simply do not understand, and we can't put a number on. We can't, we simply don't know, but we know enough to know that it is no small matter. That is for certain. That is for darn sure. And so when I see Josh Lee Kwai say something like, if you thought the fallout was over, think again, it made me think about this. And it made me think about something that a lot of people have been talking about, which is, should we sue the RC and Wizards of the Coast? And I started thinking about that. And I'm like, the best move that Wizards of the Coast and the RC could do? They could use the RC as a scapegoat and then absolve them by making them not a thing anymore. Honestly, I believe that there are a large number of people that are banding together in separate little bubbles, making plans to sue Wizards of the Coast. Because it is, and maybe I'm just being a dreamer here, because honestly, I think it would be a good thing. It would teach them a lesson. But maybe these moves that they're making are moves that their legal department is telling them that they have to preemptively make in order to preemptively win a case that they believe is inbound. And I know some of you guys are like, what, dude, you're taking this too far. They're not going to get sued. But I'm telling you guys, I've been saying this since the very beginning. My very first knee-jerk reaction on this, when I first heard about this, sorry about that. My very first knee-jerk reaction when I first heard about this was, what they did is criminal. Like, seriously. Like, if it was in any other regulated environment, it would be investigated by the FTC. And so while it may not actually be criminal, like maybe they didn't break any current laws, I think that if enough people get behind it, they could definitely see some civil liability. And there's this big prevailing argument that it's just a game, that they shouldn't be held liable for this. But the thing is, if you've been listening to anything that I say, it isn't just a game at this point. Yes, it is based on a game, but it isn't just a game. That's like saying that, think about this, that's like saying football and basketball, like professional football and basketball, is just a game. There are huge industries surrounding football and basketball. And there's a fallout to this. Because the fallout could be that the price that we pay as a community is that we eventually draw the ire of the IRS, and they start tracking our collectibles. And they start saying that we need to claim our collectibles. Now, I don't see how they actually enforce that, because what are they going to have, like the Pinkertons showing up at your house and counting your collection and scanning it all in? I don't know how they would do it, but it could very well become something like that in the future. I don't know for sure. But here's the thing. If the right people get wind of how much money is involved in this stuff, it could drastically change things. Like I said, the fallout is far-reaching. But in this video, I wanted to talk about something important, because I'm not a lawyer. I know a lot of people have told me that I should be a lawyer growing up. My mother was always like, oh, you love to argue, you should be a lawyer. And, I'm sure a lot of people get that. But the thing is that I have represented myself in court before, particularly for civil things. I had to get custody of my oldest son when he was a lot younger. There were some things that happened there. That's personal stuff, but I'm never afraid to share the truth about things like that. I will always be forward with the truth. And the thing is like, I've had to deal with the court system before, and I know how things work. And so when I was thinking about this, I said, what would happen if people decide to sue? Would they have a legal argument? And then I started doing a little bit of research, and I said, what I could do is I could ask everyone's favorite large language learning model, ChatGPT. let's see what ChatGPT says about this situation. So I went to ChatGPT. I asked it a couple of leading questions about whether or not it knew who Wizards of the Coast was, and sure enough, it knows Wizards of the Coast. I said, do you know what Magic the Gathering is? Sure enough, ChatGPT knew about Magic the Gathering. I said, do you know what Commander is? It knew about Commander. It knew about Sheldon Menery being one of the people that started Commander as a format. ChatGPT is a very well-read large language model. And because it's so well-read on Wizards of the Coast, and it understood the rules committee, the existence of the rules committee, and all these different things, I said, well, perfect. And I asked it if it was familiar with consumer law, like, if I wanted to sue a company. And it said yes. And during the time that I was interviewing ChatGPT, I made sure to keep it as, I didn't want to give it too much information. I didn't want to give it any kind of like input as far as like, you should think about this when you're thinking about answering this question. I didn't do that. I simply just asked it very vanilla questions. I didn't give it any information about specific cards. I just asked it, hey, if this thing happened where these cards got banned and they were worth, a lot of money, do you think that there would be some kind of case? And I want to share the document that it came up with, because I think that this is very, very enlightening. I don't know that if anybody's actually done this and asked ChatGPT. And you know what? ChatGPT is pretty smart. And I know some of you are going to be like, well, ChatGPT is not, but just humor us for a second. Because if there's an attorney that watches this, I would love for you to comment in the comment section and say, yeah, ChatGPT is pretty solid on that kind of stuff. I would love if an attorney could reach out through the comment section, just let me know if ChatGPT is right on with this stuff. This is very, very compelling stuff. So let's go over it. Let's see what ChatGPT said. So I've got it pulled up right here. All right. So when I asked ChatGPT all these questions, this is what it said. It said, this is an interesting scenario with multiple potential legal angles. Given the relationships and actions of the parties involved, Wizards of the Coast, the RC, and the CAG, let's break down possible legal arguments and frameworks for each party's liability. Wizards of the Coast actions, potential false advertising and consumer fraud. Key points. Wizards of the Coast continued printing, marketing, and selling products containing the banned cards during the period in which they knew a ban was imminent. They withheld information regarding the future ban, allowing these cards to be sold without informing their consumers that their value might significantly drop. This action impacted an estimated $150 million in value worldwide for collectors, vendors, and players. So it was able to read what I was saying happened, understand these points, and this is what it said as far as legal considerations. False advertising. This argument would focus on whether WOTC's marketing and sale of products containing these cards amounted to misleading practices. A potential claim could argue that by withholding material information, the impending ban, WOTC engaged in deceptive practices, leading consumers to believe that these cards would retain their playability and associated value. The argument for false advertising. It could be argued that WOTC had a duty to disclose material information affecting the value of the product. Omitting the banned information while actively marketing the cards could be construed as a deceptive practice, making consumers believe that these cards were long-term investments. The defense against it, and I love that it did this because it took a very unbiased approach, and that's the way that I wanted it. I didn't want it to be biased, even though I was giving it this information. I didn't say, tell us what kind of case we would have. I pretty much asked it, what do you think? Would there be anything like this? Yes or no? Tell me what you think. And it gave me defense and arguments for. Defense against false advertising. WOTC could argue that card value is inherently speculative and based on secondary markets, and that card bans are within their rights to maintain game balance and are not tied to the product's monetary value. So this is really interesting because this is pretty much the crux of this argument that I have been screaming out to the void about since the very start of all of this, is that they basically, like, Wizards of the Coast was basically very deceptive. They knew that this card was going to get banned by the RC, and yet they still marketed, like, they very specifically marketed these key pieces as playable pieces, as staples of the format. Namely, in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, they specifically used marketing to say that Mana Crypt was a format staple for Commander. So with that being said, no reasonable person would look at that advertising and go, they know this is going to get banned, but they did. And that's very deceptive. And so there appears to be, according to ChatGPT, some basis for false advertising there. Now, the defense on it is pretty weak. And the reason why I would say that is because we could prove that even though it is inherently speculative, the market value of these cards is what they pay attention to, and they determine what cards they're going to use for these chase rares and mythics based on their value. Like, for example, like Commander Masters is considered a more expensive set because the cards in there are more powerful and because they're more valuable, and so they sell them for more. Otherwise, they would just sell them for the same price as a regular set, and they don't. Like a Commander Masters booster pack, just a regular, what is it, set or play booster, whatever it is, it's like $20, right? And their cost, a store's cost, is much higher than like a regular play booster that's like $7. Well, why is that? It's because the cards are more expensive. It's 100% why that is. And they known it, and the community has known it, and we've always known that. Ever since they implemented master sets way back in, 2013 was the first modern master set. So the defense against it is just weak and can be disproven with a snap of a finger and very little documentation. But let's go on. Let's see what it said about consumer fraud. Consumer fraud laws often address intentional misrepresentation or omission of material facts that could lead to consumer harm. A claim under this theory would argue that WOTC's decision to withhold information about the impending ban was a deliberate omission meant to maximize profits at the expense of consumers. Sound familiar? Sounds like something I've been saying all this time. It's because it's wrong. ChatGPT recognizes it's wrong. It's read enough documentation in court cases and case law all throughout the internet to know that these are arguments that people make. It's because any industry, this is wrong. You can't just treat your consumers like this. You can't lie. You can't omit. It's gaining unfair advantage. Can't do it. So let's see what the argument is. Argument for consumer fraud. The fact that WOTC continued to market and sell these cards despite knowing they would be banned suggests an intention to profit off of consumers' lack of knowledge. This could be framed as knowingly misleading customers. You think? You think Wizards of the Coast knowingly misled us? Knowingly sent us advertising and say, hey, chase this card. This would be great for your commander decks. This would be great. And there's no reason to think that they would have banned this card because specifically Mana Crypt has been in the format since the format's inception, and they've never mentioned banning this card. And then out of nowhere, they start reprinting the heck out of this card. They've used this card before as a key highlight piece, as a reprinted piece, way back in Eternal Masters. This was one of the best cards to get. I believe it was Eternal Masters. One of the best cards to get. And they didn't ban it then. It wasn't a problem then. And Commander was a thing back then. So what? You know, why would they do this? The thing is, with crimes like this or with allegations like this, it's important to understand that a lot of it comes down to the reasonable perception of the consumer, right? You have to understand that when you're setting something up like this, you have to be able to prove to a judge that the consumer reasonably believed, based on the actions taken by the company, that they were making a safe assumption on the key argument here, which is that this was a fine staple, it was fine to invest in, and we were going to be able to have it for a long time. And during that time, they forced through that advertising, knowing that that's how people were going to feel about it, so that way they could increase their sales. And that's exactly what happened. Now let's look at the defense. WOTC may argue that they did not misrepresent the product itself, only its competitive legality, which is not directly tied to its collectible value. They could claim that all game-related decisions are within their discretion, and bans are part of the normal risk associated with card games. This is a pretty strong argument, but I would say if I was going to try to pick this defense apart, I would mention that the fact that they don't consider the competitive nature of that format, that it has always been considered to be a casual format, kind of negates that argument. In that, because it's a casual format, there really is no need to ban any cards for competitive reasons. So in other formats where they are purely competitive, like Standard and Modern, you ban cards for the balance of the game. However, in this specific scenario, they have said it time and time again that they don't consider it to be a competitive format, that they only consider it to be casual. So why would you need to ban a card in a casual format? Especially since it's been in play for so long. And especially since there are other versions of the card that do similar or the same exact thing. Ahem, Soul Ring. Ahem, Mana Vault. Mana accelerants are not needed to be banned because of their competitive nature, because this is a casual format. You shouldn't care about that. It shouldn't make a difference. So this argument is pretty weak just based on that. But they also know there's plenty of evidence, and they would have to know that when you ban a card, it loses its value. So just saying that it purely had the value that it did because of its collectability is false. Because they have plenty of history knowing that when they ban a card from a format, especially a format when it's the only one where that card is being played, that it loses all of its value. And so this is just the weakest argument, and it'd be very easy to disprove this in open court and to show a judge exactly what we're talking about. So, yeah, so far, based on what ChatGPT is telling me, I think we might actually have a strong case. Or I say we, but like, I promise you, I'm not in any active, I haven't talked to any attorneys seriously about doing this, but I mean, we as the community, the community has a strong case if we decide to go this route. But mind you, I'll say this again. Is that the best route to go? I don't know. Let's find out. Let's see what else we got here. Now, this part focuses on the rules committee. Now, when I asked ChatGPT these questions, I was not aware that the rules committee, all these things kind of happened at once. Making this video right now, I am aware that the rules committee has now been absolved for the most part, or absorbed, or whatever you want to call it. But still, that doesn't indemnify them in certain scenarios. You can't just be like, all right, we're no longer here, so bye. It's like there were still people that made decisions. And so this is targeted in that direction. Now, again, I want to say this. I am not trying to incite anybody to violence. I hate that our argument has been sullied by that. If nobody ever did that, then we would have a much better argument and we would have a much better position. And I still maintain that I haven't seen any receipts. I've seen no receipts from anyone about these death threats, these threats of violence. I've seen none. Not even a screenshot blurring out the person's name. Maybe it's because they're taking people to court. Maybe their legal team has said, hey, you can't put these on blast. Whatever it is, but I have seen no receipts. So I'm inclined to just take them at their word just because I know human nature. And I know that human nature is to respond in that way, especially when something as crazy like this happens, where they ban this much money away from, where they do a ban that affects people's money this hard. At the same time, I don't know. I haven't seen any receipts. So could this all be a manufactured ruse to basically take over Commander? Could it have been? Maybe. It's not as likely. But without the receipts, it's still on the table. That being said, ChatGPT covered what the rules committee could be liable of. Potential breach of duty or negligence. Now, key points. The RC is a body that works with WOTC to maintain the commander format and set the ban list. The RC knew of the upcoming ban and admitted to withholding information both from the CAG, Commander Advisory Group, and the public, citing financial concerns. The RC's decision to continue with the ban despite understanding the financial impact suggests a possible breach of some duty of care or negligence. Here are the legal considerations. Breach of duty negligence. While the RC is not a commercial entity, it still functions in a role that affects the economic interests of the broad community. If the RC knowingly acted in a way that harmed consumers, an argument could be made for negligence or breach of duty. Here are the arguments. Argument for negligence. The RC knew the ban would cause significant financial harm and could be considered to have a duty to avoid unnecessary economic loss to the player base. Their actions might be seen as negligent if they fail to consider less damaging alternatives. Here's the defense against negligence. The RC could argue that their primary responsibility is to the health of the game and not the financial value of the cards. Bans are within the committee's prerogative, and their duty is not to protect monetary investments, but to preserve the format's integrity. Now, here's the thing. On the one hand, I look at this and I think to myself, oh my goodness, like, could this be why the RC dissolved themselves and basically went into the bosom of WOTC? They went home, they called out to Daddy, they said, Daddy, save us. Could it be that these people were basically about to get sued for negligence, for breach of duty? Because this sounds like a pretty solid argument, legal argument to me. And again, I know that this has affected enough people, and there are probably enough attorneys that play Magic the Gathering that would 100% make this argument and would 100% take this stance and would 100% start a lawsuit. I mean, you don't want to mess with attorneys, man. They're ruthless. And I mean, I can imagine an attorney that has disposable income just going and buying a lot of Magic cards, holding some positions on some Mana Crypts and some Jeweled Lotuses because they think it's really cool, especially Jeweled Lotus. Because Jeweled Lotus, I mean, that's basically Black Lotus 2.0 for Commander, right? Well, Black Lotus 0.5 for Commander, but you get the drift. The whole point is, I could see some attorneys going, hey, these are really solid cards. I've been playing this game since I was a kid, and I'm just going to buy a ton of this stuff. I'm going to support this new Lost Caverner Ixalan. I'm going to buy, $20,000 or $30,000 worth of product and support my local LGS, and I'm going to just try to get as many of these Mana Crypts as I possibly can. I want a blue one. I want a red one. I want a white one. I want all these different colors. I want the multicolor one. Somebody just dump an egregious amount of money on this stuff because they believed that it was a safe investment. And not just a safe investment, but it's really cool. And then you turn around and make this ban in a way that it's so blatantly obvious to me that it would be even more obvious to an attorney. And that's enough money, that's enough of a slap in the face to an attorney to make them not do the threats of violence, but simply send the RC a letter in the mail and says, like, hey, guess what? I'm suing you. I'm suing you because I spent tens of thousands of dollars on this and you guys are negligent. Because it is. It was totally negligent. I've been arguing that from the very beginning. It was completely and totally negligent what they did. And if you don't see that, and the only thing that you want to do is victim blame and say it's just a card game, they're just game pieces, you're part of the problem. Honestly, you're part of the problem. So maybe that's why they ran to Papa. They ran to Wizards, because the RC is basically a bunch of glorified volunteers who probably don't have a legal department, who probably together can't form a legitimate legal defense, don't have the time. So they probably went to the bargaining table and they said, Wizards of the Coast, look, I'm sorry, but we're getting sued. We'll make a deal. We'll give you control over the ban list, over the format, to do all these things that we've been fighting you on. In exchange, you have to protect us with your lawyers. And I can totally see WOTC going, hey, got him. 100%. 100% could see that happening. It's not even that far-fetched, guys. It's not even that far. If ChatGPT can make an argument with just a few prompts, then an actual attorney can probably make a 10 times stronger argument. And this defense is paper thin at best. Because the defense says the RC could argue that the primary responsibility is to health and game. There's no way that you can say that the ban was about the health of the game when there are so many other pieces that produce fast mana still in the game, and when you released a document saying you wanted to send a strong message, and you released these documents that said what they said. Like, there's no way you could just sit there and hide behind this paper thin defense. So, yeah, maybe there's something else. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. There's more than meets the eye when it comes to this whole situation. But let's continue, because I like this last point. Combine liability and legal standing. Key points. Both WOTC and the RC were aware of the impact of the ban on the secondary market, but proceeded regardless. This is true. There might be questions of shared liability if it is argued that both entities conspired to withhold information for financial gain. Well, that's kind of rough, because I don't know what financial gain that the RC would have gotten, but the fact that Wizards of the Coast definitely got financial gain by withholding this information because they were able to sell millions of dollars versus of lost caverns of Ixalan product based on the fact that this wasn't public information, and they didn't tell the CAG, and the CAG probably would have leaked according to them, which is both a slap in the face to the CAG but also to the greater community, because the CAG represents the greater community, and we would have told them, heck no, don't do this, this is dumb, right? So they purposely withheld. It's not difficult to prove that they purposely withheld this information, and given the fact that the timelines have been set, that they withheld this information during a time that they were actively marketing and selling products that contained the booster packs and the product lines where these cards were the hit pieces, it's just indisputable to me. And I think that any reasonable judge, being a non-biased person, would look at that and go, well, yeah, common sense says that you guys withheld that information for that purpose. Why would you not? And I think that ultimately that would be a difficult argument for them to make, because they would have to take this position where they're like, oh, we do things for the better, for the betterment of the community. We wanted to make sure that the community was happy. And it's like, well, they obviously weren't happy, and that's not what you were thinking about. Real easy for a judge to just rip them a new one. So, yeah. Now, let's go on here. It says legal considerations. Conspiracy to commit fraud or deceptive trade practices. If it can be established that RC and WOTC acted together with the intent to deceive or defraud customers, there could be grounds for a combined action under laws against fraudulent business practices or deceptive trade. Sure. Argument for conspiracy. Evidence that the RC knew WOTC was selling cards that would be banned and still supported the decision without informing the CAG or public could be viewed as a coordinated effort to defraud the community. I've been saying that the entire time. Like, ChatGPT gets it. ChatGPT gets it. ChatGPT looks at it and understands what I'm saying. Why can't you? I mean, come on. They literally held it back. And then, when they had the opportunity to undo it, knowing the financial harm it would cause, they still did it. Which, for the life of me, I still don't understand. That's why I think there is definitely an ocean of information that is yet to be uncovered. Now, here's the defense. WOTC and the RC would argue that their responsibilities and decision-making processes are separate. They could claim that the RC's actions were independent of WOTC's marketing and that WOTC has no obligation to disclose bans before they are official. I mean, and that's totally fair, but that's still a super paper-thin argument, because this, simply put, there are WOTC employees on the RC. It is reasonably understood that it is impossible to separate the two. You would there's no way that a judge would look at that and go, Oh yeah, that's perfect. It's fine. Yeah, I trust those guys. Not in light of everything that's been done. Oh yeah, I totally. Yeah, they can separate it. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. They can separate. They can't even. They couldn't even keep it as insulated as they wanted because of the other video. I would highly recommend you go back and watch that video if you haven't. The video that I did on the Jake and Joel are Magic video where they talked about their rumor goblin telling them about Mana Crypt being banned a month before, and then me being able to go on TCG Player. And by the way, hopefully it's still there, but you should be able to go on TCG Player and see that a month before the ban, there was a bunch of copies of Mana Crypt that were sold. Like literally, right along the timeline that they were saying. There was a bunch of Mana Crypts that were sold below market value. Now, like, I can understand a couple of like damaged copies or like a bot sold one for $1, like that kind of thing happens. But there were several copies that happened over those days. Like enough to the point, and you got to think about this. Like TCG Player doesn't really change the market price if it's just like a one off or a two off, as long as the other ones are selling highly consistent. But it actually changed that there was a huge dip in the market price over that period of time. And it shows. So you know that there was enough copies to influence TCG Player's market pricing tool. So, and then I didn't even cover it in that video because here's the thing, like that's just on TCG Player, right? You don't know how many stores some of these copies got offloaded to, right? Because that's not recorded on any online marketing data. You don't get to see that. You don't know how many people that actually knew about this and just went to their local game store and was like, "Yeah, I got a couple of Mana Crypts I want to offload. Yeah, I'm thinking about getting out of the game. I'm gonna offload a couple Mana Crypts, some Jeweled Lotuses, maybe a couple other like rares that a dockside." Alongside some other bulk rares, and these stores were like, "Wow, yeah, this is great stuff." So think about that. Like, if it's noticeable enough on TCG Player, and on top of that, you don't really have data on how many stores may have bought copies of this thing, the widespreadness or the range of insider trading, as I call it, might have been a lot worse than really we have any access to any data. Because I know that when I owned my small little local game store, anytime I bought a card, I didn't always like put it up on TCG Player that day. I mean, sometimes it would take me a day or two to get around to putting on TCG Player because I would go and I would message my community. I would say, "Hey, I got these great cards. Anybody interested in them?" So that's probably more likely what happened on a broader scale. But we've only caught just a short glimpse of it in that timing. But yeah, if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. So there was definitely some things going on. And they would be hard pressed to use this defense. Now here's the conclusion. It said, there are arguments to be made under both false advertising and consumer fraud theories against WOTC, given the circumstances of how the cards were sold and the subsequent impact of the ban. The RC's liability is more complex and would depend on whether they can be seen as having a duty of care that they breach through negligence or through intentional omission of material facts. Any legal action would need to carefully establish the specific duties and responsibilities of each party, along with the expectation of disclosure and the foreseeable harm caused by withholding information. Now, that would be the difficult part if we were to try to bring this case to court. If somebody was to try, they would have to build a case saying that they had a responsibility that they broke, that there was some kind of breach of trust. I think that there is a case to be made. I'm not going to go into too much depth because, again, I'm not an attorney. I don't really know how these things work. I'm sure there's someone out there that could probably put this together based on the information I'm providing. But I would imagine that it would be something to the tune of like looking up previous bans and making a case saying like, hey, look, they haven't banned anything expensive in a long time. They could have banned these dual lands for the same reason. There's a lot of other expensive cards, and the reserve list comes into question because of the fact that, no cards out of the reserve list has ever been banned because of their expensive nature. Like, there's a lot of things you can go. And actually, in a few minutes, I'm going to go over that, because the very next thing we're going to get into is me adding a little bit of twist. Because remember, I didn't prompt it to say all this stuff, but it did not have this information. So I added some information. I said, does it change or add anything knowing the following facts? The RC is at least partially comprised of Wizards of the Coast employees, past, present, or past. Wizards of the Coast has instituted a reserve list in the past specifically to protect the investment value of their collectible game pieces. Listen, I was typing really fast. The autocorrect didn't work. They're in collectible. I know are spelled wrong, but ChatGPT does know what I was trying to say. That's part of it being a large language learning model. It can correct those mistakes on the fly. Now, it said, memory updated. Yes. These additional facts introduce potential complexities regarding conflicts of interest, fiduciary responsibilities, and the consistency of Wizards of the Coast policies regarding the preservation of card value. Let's refine the legal arguments in the light of this new information. And it goes through, and it talks about conflict of interest and fiduciary responsibility. The presence of current or former Wizards of the Coast employees on the RC raises questions about the objectivity and the independence of the committee's decisions. This could have legal implications. I mean, I didn't even think about this. The idea that there could be some kind of argument for conflict of interest and why they did this. It says here, argument for conflict of interest. If WOTC employees influence the RC's decision to ban cards while WOTC continued to market those cards, it could suggest a breach of fiduciary duty or a conflict of interest. The employees may have had access to non-public information regarding the future ban and could have used this knowledge to benefit WOTC. Example, continuing sales at the expense of players and vendors. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that right there just ties it together. It's black and white right there. Now, their defense against conflict of interest could be WOTC and the RC could argue that their actions were in line with their professional roles and responsibilities to ensure the health of the game. They may claim that their dual roles did not lead to undue influence over the decision and that the ban was purely a gameplay-related decision rather than a financial one. The thing is that doesn't make any sense because they have no data to track whether or not these things were an actual gameplay issue. It's a casual format. They've said it's a casual format. They don't have any leg to stand on argumentatively as to why they would make this change after 15 years of some of the cards being in the format. It just doesn't make any sense. So let's go on. Point 2, reserve list and expectation of value preservation. WOTC's history of instituting the reserve list to protect the value of collectible cards could be used to establish an expectation that WOTC places some importance on maintaining card value. This is so true. Argument for consumer fraud or misrepresentation. A reasonable expectation of value preservation. WOTC's creation of the reserve list implies a precedent where the company acknowledges and responds to concerns regarding the investment value of their collectible products. This creates a reasonable expectation for consumers that WOTC considers the impact of their decisions on card value. This is what I've been saying. Like, the entire game is designed around this concept that you can gain value. It's why people start playing Magic instead of something like Pokemon or anything else. It's because the first thing, whenever I introduce a player to Magic the Gathering, we get excited about the value of our cards. How many times have you ever seen this conversation happen where you're talking to somebody that's never played Magic before and you're trying to convince them to play and you start saying like, oh yeah, that card's worth a lot of money, and they're opening fresh booster packs and they get a hit and you're like, yeah, that card's worth a ton of money. And they're like, really? Yeah, that card's worth a lot of money. Yeah, that's the great thing about Magic is that it has secondary market value, and then they go, really? What's the most expensive card? Black Lotus. It's on the reserve list. Every new player in Magic the Gathering eventually runs into this idea that they learn about the reserve list and how valuable some of these cards could be. This is a thing that was planned. This is a thing that's understood in the community, and it's a reasonable expectation because WOTC created the reserve list. Here comes the reserve list to bite Wizards of the Coast right in the tuchus years and years later. All right? And that's what I'm trying to say is that there is this expectation, and they use it. They use it to their advantage. But let's keep going. Inconsistency policy by application. By implementing a ban that affects high-value cards without giving the same consideration as the reserve list policy, it could be argued that WOTC engaged in inconsistent or misleading practices. This might support claims of misrepresentation or deceptive trade practices. 100%. 100%. Like, if I'm on a jury and I listen to this argument and I'm looking at the broad scale of everything that's going on, and I'm looking at the history of WOTC and the things that they've done. I mean, guys, look at the Magic 30 thing, right? The reason why they charged $1,000 for these boosters was because they were concerned about the value of some of the cards you can get. You could have pulled the Black Lotus. And they're like, oh, it's not functionally the same, so we're allowed to print it. However, we know that the Black Lotus is going to be valuable. So we're charging up to $1,000 for 4 booster packs. Dude, they would not have a leg to stand on defending against this position. Like, there's no way that they could. Potential legal impact. Affected parties, players, and vendors could argue that the reserve list created a reasonable belief that WOTC would not take actions that drastically reduce the value of cards without some form of notice or protection. Yeah, because that's what happened, guys. It's 100% what happened. People did not expect this ban to come because they thought that Wizards and the RC would not be complicit in this kind of nonsense. This goes beyond the pale. It goes beyond what any reasonable person would expect from these companies and these people involved. So let's see the defense, because I love that it points out defense. WOTC could argue that the reserve list is a distinct policy unrelated to bans within specific formats. The reserve list only ensures certain cards will not be reprinted, not that they will retain value in all gameplay contexts. That's baloney. See, that right there, the only reason why I brought up that defense was because it was trying to find a defense, but this defense would not work. It was specifically, the whole reserve list was specifically to maintain the value of the cards. This idea that WOTC cares about value is built into the reserve list, because when they went to reprint the cards, right? They went to reprint the cards in Chronicles, everybody was in an uproar. And so they vowed to not reprint certain cards. And they can't even say, oh, it was like an old thing, because they've added more recent cards. Even after the Chronicles debacle happened, they added recent cards like Gaia's Cradle, which is not recent. It's 20-something years old, but still, they added Gaia's Cradle. And I'm sure that there's other cards that are on the reserve list that I'm not thinking of. But the thing is, it's there. It's black and white. Everybody that knows Wizards of the Coast, everybody that knows Magic the Gathering, even from the very start of the game, as they start to learn about it, it's just out there. There's so much information that paints WOTC into a corner. And they have said over and over again, we will not abolish the reserve list. We will not go back on this promise. I wonder why. I wonder why you won't go back on this promise. Because you know that you guys care about value. And if you went back on this promise, it would absolutely demolish any trust that anybody has in your game, and your value would tank. That's why. That's why you won't go back on the promise. So, there we go. They might further argue that format bans are necessary for gameplay balance, and that any financial impacts are an unavoidable consequence of game management rather than intentional harm. That's baloney, because the intentional harm came from them knowingly marketing the cards while they were planning on banning it. That's intentional. That's the harm that was intentional. That's the argument. That's the crux of the argument. That's where I'm thinking all they would need to do, I think any Magic player that purchased anything during that time would deserve at minimum the value of an entire booster box refunded to them. And some people, if they're able to prove that they ordered more, like, I would call, if it was me, what I would be suing for is the entire value of whatever somebody purchased up to $5,000 refunded to them for anything that they purchased throughout the year of 2023 to 2024 concerning Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Commander Masters, and so on and so forth. That's what I would be pushing for, because 100%, up to a reasonable value, like, $5,000, maybe even $10,000 if you can prove it, and get all of that refunded, all of it, because that's where they marketed these products, and that's specifically the crux of the issue. Because if they would have banned these cards,
a year ago, immediately banned these cards a year ago, and they say we've been doing it for a year and a half. And you know, when people say a year and a half, they usually mean like 2.5. It's usually a lot longer. They just don't have like memory of how long it's been. You know, like it's probably been a lot longer. But all of this product, think about the product timetables. We know that Wizards of the Coast starts planning product about 3 years in advance before it releases. We know that the RC had been discussing banning fast mana like this for a while. And so this decision to ban this was probably made a long time ago, and it was brought to Wizards of the Coast and to the CAG from the RC. The CAG probably said, no way, this is stupid. Don't do this because you just printed Jeweled Lotus and it's a great card and a lot of people like it and it's not even that broken. And we don't like banning cards. That's what Lee Kwai said himself. He didn't like banning cards. He's more upset that they designed the card in the first place. But once they designed the card, you know, hey, leave it in there. People are collecting this card. This is not right to ban it. So they probably wanted to ban it way back then, and they didn't. And that's why this time around they're like, hey, let's not tell the CAG because we know they're going to disagree with us. And then Wizards of the Coast was like, okay, look, we don't have a problem with you banning this card, but 3 years ago, based on the last conversation we had, we decided to go ahead and put one or more of these cards as chase cards in these coming sets. So at least let us get rid of all the product. And that's why that stupid mystery booster festival in a box thing that they had included packs of Lost Cavern of Ixalan and included packs of Commander Masters. Specifically for that reason. So that way they could get rid of whatever they had left in stock. Right? And then 2 weeks after that, here comes the ban. Hope you didn't pull any of those in your booster packs that we sent you. Right? So, I mean, come on, guys. This is so blatantly obvious. They would have no defense in this. Now let's look at number 3. Legal and ethical responsibility of the RC. If RC members are current or former WOTC employees, this could suggest a closer relationship between the RC and WOTC than might have been publicly perceived. This could raise the following points. I mean, you think? There are a lot of people, dude, all the time people are on there, on my various posts and various videos saying like, oh, you are aware that the RC is a separate entity. Are you aware that there are employees of WOTC on the RC? How separate do you really think it is? Are you aware that they colluded with each other on these bans for over a year? I mean, people just don't know. And I try not to get mad or upset at people because I know that they're just telling me a version of their reality that they understand. But the thing is, they don't actually understand reality for what it really is. I mean, perception is reality for a lot of people. But sometimes, if you can't perceive it, you don't understand what reality is. It's like an ant can't perceive the size of a house, so he thinks that, oh, this is just a mountain. He doesn't know the difference between a house and a mountain because his perception is so small. But once you take a step back and you look at things for what they are, you start to understand more. So all you guys out there that have been arguing about this, take this as your moment. Take this as your moment to step back and look at the big picture. All right? So let's see what the argument for shared responsibility is. RC members with WOTC ties may have acted in a way that aligns more closely with corporate interests rather than community interests. Yeah. This could open up claims that the RC should be considered an extension of WOTC. It is now, thereby making the company more directly liable for the harm caused by the ban. If WOTC or the RC knew that continuing to market these cards would harm consumers financially, yet did nothing to mitigate or disclose the harm, they could be seen as complicit in deceptive or fraudulent conduct. Yeah. What do you guys think? Give me an algorithmic comment in the comment section below right now. Pause the video. We're almost to the end anyway. Whatever. And say, yeah, that makes sense. Marco, you have an amazing take on this. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for bringing this to our attention so we can stop playing power bottom for WOTC. Because I am tired of getting screwed over and over and over again. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. We are just getting screwed over and over and over again. And they knew. They knew what they were doing. It's obvious. It's so obvious. Defense for RC and WOTC. Let's see what it says. They could argue that the RC, despite some members being former or current employees, operates independently and makes decisions for the health of the format. Bans are a common and necessary part of managing any competitive game, and their primary responsibility to balance the integrity of gameplay, not to financial speculation or preservation. Solid argument. Couple of things here. All right, first off, health of the format. What data you have to prove that this was done for the health of the format? You have zero data. You have zero data. As a matter of fact, the health of the format depends on the stability of the format. The health of the format depends on the valuation of the cards within the format. People are not going to want to play Commander if they think that their cards in value. As a matter of fact, that's why people play Commander. That's why more people play Commander than they do any other format, because people genuinely don't like rotating formats where a card can be, 40 or 50 bucks a piece while it's in standard, and as soon as it rotates out of standard, it drops to nothing. That's exactly why people start playing Commander in the first place. Everyone I've ever asked that question has said that. Because you get to play with your cards longer and they hold the value longer when they're good in that format. That's why a lot of people play Modern. That's why a lot of people play Legacy and Vintage. The whole reason you play in these formats where there aren't bans that often is because you want your cards to be safe and you want them to be valuable for a long time. That's one of the attractions of Commander, and that's part of the health of the format, is that we don't get bans. We don't get cards that rotate and ban out every so often. I have a deck that I've been playing for almost 10 years that is still viable. I can still play the deck. Except if I had a Mana Crypt in it, I'd have to change that card out of it. So, and this idea of the health of the format, if you were really caring about the health of the format, what was your argument for why it was unhealthy? Because it was fast mana? Okay, there's plenty of other fast mana. There's Soul Ring, there's Mana Vault, there's a ton. There's Dark Ritual, there's a ton. Oh, because it was 0 mana? Well, then why don't you go after Ancient Tomb? Ancient Tomb is effectively a land that is more difficult to target, produces 2 mana the turn that you play it, costs 0 mana to play it, and guess what? It also deals damage to you on average. About 2 damage a turn. Not that much different from 1.5 damage a turn, or at max 3 damage a turn. Literally the same exact thing. If not, maybe even a little bit better. It might be a little bit better. Why didn't you ban that? Oh, because it's not about the health of the format. It's about something else that's much more nefarious that we can't cover. Either way, you were negligent when you did it. I think that's important. So this whole idea of doing it for the health of the game is just poo-pooed out the window. And then, again, here it is again with this competitive game. You guys have said time and time and time again that this is not a competitive format, that it is a casual format. So any argument mentioning the competitiveness of the game is moot. It's totally moot. So yeah, your primary responsibility may be to the balance and integrity of gameplay, but if you're trying to balance gameplay, then why did you absolutely wreck a specific color? Red. Red doesn't have anything to be competitively viable as far as mana production. Like Dockside Extortionist was it. I mean, you could argue the mana rocks, but the mana rocks are the same across the board for every color. But like, what other mana accelerants did Red have that were as good as Dockside? That if we were even to submit to this idea that it's about the competitive nature of it, then why would you affect Red? That affects the gameplay. Now people that have Red decks can't play their Red decks anymore. They can't be competitive anymore. So what is this? And Red decks weren't putting up astonishing numbers. I don't see any Red decks around me that absolutely stomped competitive EDH tournaments. It's usually blue. What does Dockside have to do with blue? So I mean, it's just a non-issue. It's just a non-issue that you guys are trying to solve, and it's obvious because you were trying to send a strong message. So let's go to the conclusion, and then we'll finish up this video because I know it's got an hour. Hey, you guys have watched an hour-long video of mine before. Hopefully you enjoyed it thoroughly. But here we go. The involvement of WOTC employees in the RC, coupled with the reserve list precedent, strengthens the case for potential liability under theories of consumer fraud, misrepresentation, or breach of fiduciary duty. It raises the question of whether the RC, acting with the knowledge of WOTC's marketing, might have failed to act independently, leading to actions that harmed consumers while protecting corporate interests. If pursuing legal action, it would be critical to gather evidence showing that RC members influenced the ban decision in a manner favorable to WOTC's financial interest, or that they knowingly allowed harmful actions to continue despite understanding the impact on card values. And I think that that is just so easy to do in this situation. And honestly, if it's that easy for me to figure it out with ChatGPT, I think that the reason why WOTC took over the RC earlier today was specifically because of this. I think it's quite clear. What do you guys think? Sound off in the comment section. Give me an algorithmic comment if you agree with me. Even if you disagree with me, give me an algorithmic comment there where you tell me that I'm an idiot, that, you know, I'm just a provocateur, that I'm just trying to cause trouble. Whatever you want to say. You hate me. You think that my brown eyes look like poop. Whatever you want to say. I don't really care. The point is, we need to get this message out here, and we need people to hear this, because we have to stop being mistreated by Wizards of the Coast. This is a game that we all care about. It's a game that we all love, and we should defend it because it's something that a lot of us grew up on, and it's something that is near and dear to our hearts. And I don't know about you, but like, this is too big. It's too big. It's too big for us to just let it go by. I don't care how forgiving of a person you are. At some point, you have to draw the line in the sand. And I think that this is it. This is that point. And if there's an attorney that watches this video and you think that I have some solid arguments, or really that ChatGPT has some solid arguments, let me know. Or if you think that ChatGPT totally got this wrong, let me know too. Because I really don't know, you know? Or if you want me to be a material witness to some of these points, I'll do that. Why not? Why not? I used to own a game store. I'm pretty familiar with WOTC's policies. I'm pretty familiar with the history of Magic the Gathering. I would call myself a material expert on this kind of thing. I've been around for a long time, been playing since I was a kid. You know, I have a lot of memory, have a lot of firsthand experience. You know, let me know. I would love to be a part of something like this. But at the same time, you never know. All right, man. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks everybody for watching. You guys have a good night. And yeah, peace, love, and chicken grease. See ya.